Hi everybody, I'm Billy, and this is Antioch, Chapter 7, Ghost Ship. Biggs motioned at the note. Well, what's it say? They were all curious. They were a miserable year's worth of curious. Michael weighed the note in his hand. It says you must all come with me to Antioch. The instructions and the circumstances were difficult for him to accept. I never believed in people overseas. Now you're telling me they're all gone because of this plague. I'm afraid no one has escaped Moreau. The sailors had been living in spite of the bow run for months, but Michael was just beginning to comprehend the devastation. Andelin remembered that moment of realization. She spoke, believing if they were to be welcome, they had to help. You said hundreds of people have died. That cannot account for this entire town. Where are the others? I don't know. I don't know where they are. Michael put his head in his hands, trying to think of the right thing to do. And while I sit here, the smoke carries on the wind. Biggs said, Might be some over at the other boat. Michael looked up at him. What other boat? We ain't the first ones to get here. There's another boat over yonder up the coast. Zeke sent more than us. Michael stood up. The survivors could be there. The high, rocky coast overlooked an endless, crashing ocean to the south. The cliffs appeared to thrust out of the water. Michael and the sailors traveled the ridge, searching for a safe way down. The second ship was still farther east, and a long swim out as well. Climbing back up from another dead end, Michael said, What is that name you call them? Bowron? Andelin said, It means deaf ones. He paused. But they're not deaf. No, they are not. It is morbid humor. Michael frowned and moved on to the next possible descent. Tell me about this Zeke. Andelin said, We know very little about him, actually. Our memories of him, collectively, are muddled. I did not understand why that was until having just now experienced the effect of your ability. Drake said, Whoa, you're right, that's why. Ditch said, Good job, man. Way to keep up. Michael said, What can you tell me about him? Biggs said, Cap's only one remembers talking to him. Said he's in a big hurry, worrying about the others going to die. Michael did his best to understand the sailors without constantly interrupting them, but the way they spoke Moroan was very strange, and they all spoke it in different ways. Ditch's rapid slang baffled him the most. Yeah, we all got pretty much the same story, man. It goes, oh crap, zombies, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap, and then maybe something about Zeke. We just woke up on a boat. Nobody saw him before we saw him, you know? Then he's gone. Ah, I see. Well, what does he look like? Drake said, He's a white guy, like Ditch. Man, I'm not white. What's wrong with you? Andelin said, Personally, I do not remember him at all, but everyone has described him as very much like you, Michael. Black hair and light skin, although younger. He was young, was he not? Biggs said, Yep, little squirt, just a kid. Andelin said, Michael, forgive me for asking this, but why are you so mature? At 45 years old, and with much gray in the black of his tidy cut and thick mustache, Michael looked like a chaperone among the sailors. He pretended to be paying more attention to the path than her odd question, but he suspected she was about to reveal something about the curious senescence he'd noticed in them earlier. Don't people grow old overseas? Andelin said, We did, until we met Zeke. I am 52, but after waking up on the Grace, I appeared to be 30 years younger than that. Biggs said, Maybe 20. Andelin glanced at him sideways and let a smile slip. Drake laughed and then blurted out, Ditch is so old, he's bald. Ditch frowned. I'm 37, man. I'm not old. But yeah, my tats look older than me now. Look at him. Ink's all faded. Drake persisted. It's really funny when Ditch's stubble comes in. He looks like a little bald kid. Man, you are a kid, and you're getting on my nerves. Andelin redirected the conversation. Does your ability not restore youth, Michael? Michael had stopped trying to find a way down. He was just standing there, thinking about what the sailors were saying. They were describing athanacy, deathlessness, another thing that didn't exist. No, it doesn't. Ditch whistled. I guess Zeke's hospital's a beast. Michael frowned, not convinced that any of them were telling him the truth. Ditch said, Oh, sorry, man, yours is good too. Michael said, Did any of you witness him give hospital, as I did? Andelin had always been suspicious of Zeke. I did not. What Ditch said is true. Most of us simply woke up on a boat. Ditch said, We've been talking about Zeke, man. He said it like it was the only thing they'd been talking about for the last 11 months. It doesn't look like nothing anyway, right? Like when you put the hospital on Biggs, he just kind of went out for a sec. Isn't that what Zeke did to us? Michael couldn't say. Andelin said, My first assumption was that he had administered some sort of an injection, a medical antidote for the infection. But that did not explain the change in my appearance, or how I had escaped the situation I last remember. Michael said. What do you mean? I had been traveling with a small group of survivors for 12 days. The last thing I am able to recall is being trapped against a locked door, burning from the infection, and surrounded by the Bowron that were killing my companions. I cannot imagine Zeke trotting in to save me from that with a hypodermic needle. Michael started looking for the way down again, thinking about everything they'd said. It was all so unbelievable, but they told it like the truth. He said, What do you know about my order? Andelin said, Only the impossible, that you are capable of curing the infection by some sort of putative energy manipulation. The look on Michael's face prompted her to clarify. That you are psychic healers? Ditch said, Yeah, that was real weird for us. Cap got us all together after Zeke split and said there's these guys with magic powers that are going to help us. At first I was like, whatever, man. But then I was like, whatever, man, There's already zombies, wizards. Sure. Andelin said, Not long before that day, I would have considered Captain's story laughable. Since then I've only hoped it was true. Michael took out the note. Did anyone see who wrote this? Ditch said, Cap said Zeke did. First I thought it was just illegible. Turns out it's this whole other language. Michael realized he was going to have to speak to their captain if he wanted to learn anything about Ezekiel. Then he paused. Another language. How is it all of you speak Meroan? Wherever did you learn it? Meroan was one of the oldest languages in the kingdom, but there were towns only a few days away that didn't use it at all. He didn't know how it could exist overseas. Andelin wanted to ask the same question. Where we are from, what we are speaking is known as continental. It is the most generally accepted form of communication in all of the great nations. Michael's confusion only deepened with every question he asked. He went back to scrutinizing the note. Andelin said, I had not expected you to be completely unfamiliar with Zeke. Michael shook his head helplessly. I've no knowledge of this man. They were all puzzled. Andelin said, Michael, his primary concern was in guiding us to Moreau. He told Captain it was the shortest path by land to Antioch. Michael nodded. It's a 3-day walk, but that's right. The coast is high and wild for miles in either direction. Any other way would take much longer. More ships are coming. What are your plans? Are you going to stay to meet them? I do not know if they can survive 3 days of travel by land now that the Bowron have a foothold. Michael went blank for a moment. So tremendous were his responsibilities. Then he shook his head. I can't. People are going to die no matter what I do, but I think the best thing is to return to Antioch as soon as possible, to inform the rest of my order. I am only here by chance. The others sit there useless, ignorant of what is happening. Andelin nodded. May I suggest then that before we leave, we burn Moreau along with the bodies. We should at least clear a path for any others. She assumed he would have a problem with burning the town, so she had arguments ready to support the suggestion. Michael drew back. We can't do that. It's blasphemy to burn a body. They'll be damned. It was a lesson from his childhood that he had never challenged. Repeating it, in the wake of everything that had happened, he didn't know if he believed it or not, or if it mattered. Andelin found herself in an awkward and unexpected position, arguing against religion. Not wanting to offend Michael, she spoke cautiously. Bowron continue to spore after they are put down. The smallest particle of their haze is deadly and reproductive. We know of no other way than burning them to stop that process. Michael couldn't respond. After years of distance from the faith in which he'd been raised, he had difficulty remembering even the shortest of its prayers. He didn't feel qualified to argue against life on behalf of the soul. They found a worn trail leading down to the waves. From there the shipwreck leaned among jagged rocks 100 yards out to sea. Its vast, square sails fluttered in a perpetual death spasm. Even from that distance, Michael knew it was the largest structure he'd ever seen. The hull loomed out of the water taller than his father's inn. He started walking toward it through the spray. We don't have much daylight left. I suggest you all come with me. The shore is certainly dangerous. The sailors left everything but their rifles behind and followed him in. They half swam and half scrambled over the rocks to reach the ship. Scaling its quaking height onto the angled deck was a wet hazard as well. It smelled of mold and decay. Its name engraved on rusted plates was Vesper. As the others quietly helped each other over the rail, Michael stood with his Callaghan drawn before the dark openings to the hold and the deckhouse. No one needed to say the ship was deserted. They all knew it. With the last of them aboard, Michael raised his sword and shouted, Come, devils! The sailors readied their weapons behind him and craned their necks to see. Nothing came. After too much of Michael's unproductive shouting, Drake suggested, Maybe you should try something else. He pulled his chin into his throat, imitating Michael's voice and manner. Come, devils! Michael raised an eyebrow at him. The others covered embarrassed faces. Then Drake said, Andolyn likes ahoy, copying her clear call with a man's screeching impersonation of a woman and a limp-wristed wave. Ditch swatted him and hissed, "Don't piss him off, Dukas." Michael frowned at Drake's impropriety. "I don't believe any are coming either." Then he marveled for a moment at what he stood upon. "I've never seen anything so huge. Do you recognize it?" They did not, but suggested they could find out more by searching the deckhouse. Michael walked it through, making sure they were safe to search its scattered documents. He decided to explore below. "Perhaps one of us will discover something illuminating." Andolyn said, "I will accompany you. Since you have never been aboard a ship, I might be useful." Michael nodded, and they left the deckhouse together, the door locked behind them. She followed him into the stairwell's tilted darkness. In the divided light, they hadn't been able to see that the ship was filled with smoke. Halfway down, he stopped and turned to face her. His eyes were glowing gold. Andolyn's face opened and she backed away from him. Michael said, "Go back to the others." She went on her heels up the awkward stairs, moving faster and faster as she approached the relative safety of the deckhouse. Michael's eyes had come as a shock, and now she was alone, exposed. Her body stiffened with fear. As she pounded on the locked door, that last memory before the grace overcame her. She pounded harder and shouted, watching over her shoulder for the Vesper's dead hands, knowing they were on their way. Michael took a deep breath and plunged into the hold, his eyes like candles in the billowing darkness. Shadows leapt and shrank as he turned his head. The ship rocked in the wind and tide like a chair with a short leg. Every time it set down, thin, hovering clouds lifted from the walls and the floor. He tried a door near the base of the stairs. It resisted, but with a shrug he broke the wood around the handle. He went inside and closed it behind him. A starved corpse in the corner of the small room disappeared with the dimming of Michael's light. He breathed. Using cabins as pockets of air, Michael explored the vessel into its belly, where he heard the clinking and rattling of chains inside the rooms, an idle, metallic shuffling. The sound stopped when he drew near. What was bound within had noticed him. The chains suddenly wrenched and caught like they held ferocious, mute beasts. Michael kicked a door in. Smoke surged out of the room. In the curling shadows of its cell, a skinless human body struggled against shackles on its wrists and ankles. Naked muscle stretched tight and spare over its frame and made a sound like twisting leather as it lunged and strained. Its black eyes sparkled in the light from Michael's. Gunshots came from overhead. The Bowron pulled forward, bearing its chest on its restraints. Michael swung his sword. The chains went slack and the halves hit the floor. He ran back through the smoky gloom, skipping the air pockets, lungs bursting before the orange light of the stairwell. Then he raced up the steps and onto the deck to gasp in the clean air. Hands on his knees, breathing, Michael looked over and saw the deckhouse door hanging open. The frame around the latch was splintered. He hurried over, but stopped right before going through. He didn't want to get shot again. "Sailors? We're in here. We're okay." Their weapons clicked and clacked as they stood down. Michael peeked through the doorway, cleaning his blade with the lower front of his tabard. "What happened?" Drake said. "I couldn't figure out the lock fast enough for Andolyn, so she told me to shoot it off. She was freaking out." Andolyn's eyes and lips were slits. "You could not open a door!" A little burst of laughter escaped from Jake as he defended himself. "It's not like it did it on purpose. It's a foreign door." Ditch said, "Hey, shut up, man. It's not funny," but couldn't look up from the ship's log. He was discovering the tail of the hold. Biggs said, "Michael, look here," and handed him a crumpled, bloody sheet of parchment. Michael darkened. 3 lines and a signature in sacred script. Ditch lowered the ship's log with wide eyes and goose flesh. "There's a mess of Bowron locked up down there, isn't there, man?" Michael nodded. The sailors froze, suddenly feeling like juicy crickets on an ant bed. Wells said, Are they coming?" Michael shook his head, no. Sunset was an hour off. Biggs said, "Come stay with us on the Grace tonight. We'll come back tomorrow with Cap, burn this thing to the water." It was a difficult decision for Michael. Every moment he spent purging the smoke, more people were going to die. But he couldn't leave those tasks behind, or do them by himself in the dark. 50 sailors gathered around a bonfire near the shore, watching the Vesper burn through the next evening's sunset. The blaze made an immense, roiling column of smoke. To the west, similar dark spires rose from the burning of Moreau. As the shipwreck collapsed, some swore they saw its demon crew dancing in the inferno. That is the end of Chapter 7. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can follow the link at the top of my website, www.williameharlan.com. and purchase the full novel from Amazon in ebook format for $2.99 or as a paperback for $12.99. Thanks for listening. Tune in next week for Chapter 8, Wizards.